Okay, well, I'm really excited to welcome Bryan Stromer, who is a HOD graduate, is going to talk a little bit about his career and what he's been doing since he graduated HOD, and then specifically just the value of in-person versus hybrid versus completely virtual. Kind of his career has seen all three different phases of that particular work life. And so he's going to talk a little bit about each of those today. But welcome, Bryan. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Just to get us started, would you mind to introduce yourself with like the year you graduated HOD and a little bit about your HOD experience?
Yeah, so I am graduated in 2017, majoring in HOD. For me, I think what really attracted me to the major was this idea of kind of really focusing on people in the business world and understanding how are these organizations that I'm about to enter operate? How do I kind of transition from college to the workplace? And I think HOD did a really great job of preparing me for that.
Mhm. Yes, I think that is something that really appeals to a lot of students in HOD is just that applied work experience. And so, a couple of things I remember that you did. You had several vocational internships, but then you also did something really kind of unique and outside the box for your capstone semester. Would you mind to tell them a little bit about what you did for that?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll say one of my favorite things about internships is I think it's a great way to try to um, get to explore a new career or kind of different phases without having to necessarily commit to it full time. So for me, before my HOD internship, I had done an HR internship in finance in New York and wanted to kind of see a very different experience for my HOD internship. So I had a chance meeting with Candace Lee, who at the time was not kind of over all of athletics, but still in an administrative position there. And really was just interested in her experience. And she is a fellow HOD graduate. So I thought that was really interesting and wanted to understand the world of athletics, which was something that I saw people get very excited about, as a student, but didn't really understand the inner workings of it. So spent my semester working with Vanderbilt Athletics, and at the time, Vanderbilt was rolling out their strategic plan, which they were calling Immersion Vanderbilt, and I really focused on understanding how could athletics integrate its mission with immersion Vanderbilt. Sorry, there's a lot of buzzwords, I feel like, and that.
Hmm. And one of the things I want to look back around, you said you had a chance meeting. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was an RA for during for 3 years of my 4 years at Vanderbilt. And one of my favorite things about that is I'm sure you all remember during freshman year move in, you drive up and there's people who are giving your keys out, and they're actually RAs who are giving the keys out. And Candace had kind of driven up in a golf cart to just greet some of the new families and give out snacks from Vanderbilt Athletics. And one of my dreams was always to get to ride in one of the golf carts. So I got to talk to Candace and I told her about that. And she invited me to kind of come around. Actually, a few weeks later, gave me a tour of all the athletic facilities on the golf cart and was able to kind of just form a connection through that.
Hmm. Hmm. So, just want to kind of encourage the students that are listening to kind of hold on to that moment, those chance meetings that would never happen if you were completely virtual or weren't in community with others. And then one other thing that I'd love for you to share is I remember you went to a conference when you were doing your capstone semester. Tell us a little bit about that and what happened at that conference.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I go to a lot of conference. So which one do you want me to talk about there?
Well, the one where you met the Microsoft
Oh
contact.
yes, of course. So one of the areas that I really focus on and I focus on in my job right now is accessibility and people with disabilities. And so I had gone to a conference really focused on companies that are hiring people with disabilities. And through that, I had met a Microsoft recruiter who she said to me, I'd love for you to apply for Microsoft roles. Again, I said earlier on, I had done an HR internship before that.
Mhm,
So I went online and started looking for HR opportunities. And Microsoft does for a lot of their kind of early in career, they do rotation programs, which is a
mhm,
whole another topic and something I'm a really strong advocate for. But the HR rotation was closed and the marketing one was open, which was something that I had always kind of been interested in. So I reached out to her and I said, hey, I found this role. Would you mind referring me? And she was actually friends with the recruiter for that role. So
mhm,
again, with a lot of these big tech companies, the truth is they just receive an overwhelming amount of applications on their online system. So if you can go to conferences or make those connections that differentiate yourself a little bit from just the kind of mass recruiting that occurs on campus or online, it's a really great way just to get your name seen and get these opportunities.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's so important and sometimes such a foreign concept, especially to students to be like, what? Like go to a conference when I'm
Yeah.
undergrad. But a really fun story with that is we have a Joel Gordon scholarship that is applicable to students that are doing a capstone in Nashville. And it's healthcare related, but the student who won the Joel Gordon last semester used hers to go to a conference in New Orleans. So I think if you can there are lots of really I think unique ways that you could apply for funds to support that, and sometimes even organizations that you're partnering with will pay for you to go because they want you to bring that knowledge back. But so there's a great example number two about how you had this chance encounter with a recruiter, and then is that how you ended up landing your first time your role at Microsoft?
Yes, so that
Mm-hmm.
is actually how I ended up landing that role. And I mean, a fun story about that is I stayed in touch with that recruiter throughout my time at Microsoft, and she ended up leaving and now is leading, I think, diversity and inclusion for SAP in the Americas. And SAP is a pretty big tech company. So it's just a good lesson of, even how do you maintain these relationships once maybe what you've originally were thinking about it for has that you've been successful. It's how do you build authentic relationships and not just like, oh, I want a job, and once I get a job I'm done with um this person or this relationship, but really owning that and continuing to invest in it.
Yes. Well, and you're somebody that's really good at like investing in your professional development and always thinking about like, okay, how can I engage in, some kind of new set of outlet or knowledge? And that's where I think the Schwartzman scholarship took you at that point. So tell us a little bit about that. So you'd been at Microsoft for a little bit, and I can't remember if you applied. I feel like you did apply pre-COVID, and then you were there during the pandemic. But tell us a little bit about that experience. It's so unique.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun story actually, why I applied. So, Microsoft, and I can talk a little bit about this in kind of in a little bit, but it is they have a basically a college campus as their headquarters. So there's 120 buildings, all these different cafeterias. There were events like you'd walk outside and there'd be like a petting zoo. So very kind of like what you would think of in the traditional big tech campus. And um, I had moved out to Seattle for that. And after Vanderbilt and done a rotational program, so you kind of have a group of 30 people in the exact same position. You're all friends. You all go through this transition together. And when everything went virtual, I found myself really missing that connection. Missing, I had the opportunity to travel a lot for Microsoft, missing the ability to travel. So I started to look at, what are opportunities that I can do that are going to take me out of just being in Zoom or Teams meetings all day and really kind of get back on the ground and renew my focus on what I'm passionate about. So I went into Microsoft doing marketing and really wanted to pivot to accessibility focused work. Um, and I found out about Shoresman through at Vanderbilt. There's a Posse Foundation scholar, and they just have an email list. And I just checked my emails occasionally and saw that they were doing an info session with Shoresman, and had heard about it when I was graduating, but it just was not the right time. um, and went to this info session and just really was interested in this idea of they pay for everything. You go to China for 1 year, you get your master's from Tsinghua, which is kind of the most prestigious university in China, and you all live together in kind of a very similar experience to I think what the college is that Vanderbilt, the residential system they're building is.
Mhm.
So that was really fun and a really nice way to kind of I think just take a break from the working world and this kind of Zoom state that we were all constantly in during the peak of the pandemic.
Mhm. Mhm. And it was there that you kind of started thinking about your transition a bit. And I think you saw the opportunity come available for Amazon.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, during Shoresman, I focused on accessibility and looking at what tech companies were doing around
Mhm.
accessibility in China. And I mean, again, there, I think kind of using my network. So, for example, there is the head of corporate social responsibility for Lenovo. I had seen a post she did on LinkedIn before I went to China, and Lenovo is dual headquartered in North Carolina and Beijing. And I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, I'm coming to Beijing. Can you introduce me to anyone?" And through that, I actually got to work with Lenovo on doing some events in China around accessibility, which is what I talked about in my interview for my role that I'm doing now, which I am a senior product manager for accessibility at Amazon in New York. So we're really focused on both the employee experience and customer experience for people with disabilities. So kind of my dream job, but all of these different opportunities I've had, I can definitely name a handful of people who helped me get there. I mean, one thing I will say about Shoresman is when I hear from all my friends who are looking to apply to grad schools, they all require letters of recommendations. And a lot of my friends are like, I am not in touch with any of my professors. None of my professors are going to even remember who I am. And one thing that I did, and I didn't do this, just for this reason, but I always love to stay in touch with my professors because I think it's interesting. So that's not an issue that I ever felt that I had. And I was really fortunate when Shoresman came around to be able to ask my professors for recommendations. So I think that's something you could start thinking about now is who are the professors that you really want to build a relationship with, not just during your time at Vanderbilt, but after that too.
Mhm. Such great advice. Yes, and Bryan has been so good about that. Every time you came in town, you would, give me a little shout out. We would connect, and so flash forward to now. A fun fact is, hopefully, at some point, Bryan's going to teach the capstone class in New York when we have enough students that are in person there again. So we're always trying to find ways to stay connected. And we're able to do this virtually, but I did come to New York recently and meet with
Yes.
you and get to see your space and learn more about your role. That was so fun. So, this is kind of where we're wrapping up here. It's just the tricky part is thinking about like there might be students that are still completely virtual and how do they navigate some of these tips that I've tried to highlight that you've really done a great job of sharing that have helped you get from point A to point B with your career. Many of them would have never happened if you weren't like in person with these contacts. But do you have any tips for people that are fully virtual and maybe just a word or two about the value of being in person, especially early on in your career?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think I'm definitely an advocate of being in person early on in your career. There have been so many of these chance encounters, like I talk about the one with Candace, but I've had that in my career too, where I've just run into people in the hallway or I talk to people after they present, and those are things I wouldn't have gotten to do virtually. But I've also, on the flip side, had experiences recently where I've met people in person for the first time who I met virtually initially. And in my head, I was trying to figure out actually if I've met them in person before because I felt like I knew them so well.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I think one thing that I've really enjoyed is just scheduling coffee chats with folks. I always give the advice of try to find a connection before you reach out to that person, especially if you're
Mhm.
cold reaching out on LinkedIn. I get a lot of kind of messages on LinkedIn, and I'm much more likely to respond to them if they say something like, "Oh, I went to Vanderbilt, I studied HOD, I worked at Microsoft, I'm interested in Schwarzman Scholars, I did policy like there." Or if you look at my profile, I do a lot of work around disability advocacy. If people talk about that, those are the areas that I really care about and that I'm interested in. So try to find those connections to
Mhm.
people that you're reaching out to, because if you're reaching out to someone because they have like an interesting career, chances are they're getting a lot of people reaching out and they just might not have time to respond to everyone. So if you can try to again differentiate yourself, that's some advice I would give.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brian. I know you're very busy and we're grateful for these stories. And you can find so much more on one of the things I put in the recap is stay current on LinkedIn. Brian does such a good job of putting out articles and sharing his career experiences. So we really appreciate your time and I'm thankful for you. And I hope that we can continue to find ways to stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you. And feel free to connect on LinkedIn.
Yes, I'll share that with the students. Okay.